Hey folks, and welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. I've got a bit of a different review for you today in the Creative Soundblaster X4. I don't normally review products like this. When Creative reached out to me about this one, I was in two minds about it, but I decided to say yes in the end because years and years ago when I started my journey in this hobby, one of the first products I ever bought for my laptop at the time was a Creative Soundblaster like this one. And that's because I thought it was going to give me a bit of a way to upgrade the sound out of my PC, hopefully give me better access to high quality music playback, and that was a big part in starting my journey to where I am today. So part of this, I guess, was a reminiscence for me to see where things had gotten to in the world of Creative and Sound Blasters, but also to see if a product like this, which is kind of aimed at more computer users and gamers rather than audiophiles, to see how this would stack up as an audiophile solution. In other words, if you're both a gamer and an audiophile, can you buy one of these and expect to get the best of both worlds, both for audio listening at high fidelity and also for gaming? And so this review is going to be a bit of a funny one. I'm going to jump around a bit. I'm going to talk about this from a pure music listening point of view, and then I'm also going to talk about the features and functions and how it performs for gaming. Use the chapter markers down below if you don't care about any particular type of use. In other words, if you just want gaming, skip ahead to that. If you just want music, you can skip between music and maybe some of the features in there and see what's going to work for you. The X4 retails for $140 and what you get for your money is essentially just this box and some software that goes on your computer. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's a good feeling little box for $140. You feel like you're getting a nice quality piece of hardware. It looks good. It feels nice and solid. And it's got really good functionality on the device itself. To give you a quick tour of what's on the device, on the front panel, we've got a microphone input and we've got a headphone or headset input. So if you've got an all-in-one headset, you can plug it in there. If you've got dedicated microphone and headphones, you can split it and plug it into each socket. Then on the top of the device, we've got three buttons that allow you to do different things like mute the microphone, switch between the effects modes and the direct mode, and then scroll through some of the specific effects like their Super X-Fi, the EQs. I'll talk about all those in a different section in a moment. On the top, we've got a volume control wheel, which is also able to be used to adjust your microphone level and balance control. And it's also a clicky button, which means you can mute at the touch of a button if you need to. And that's really nice if you're someone like me that uses active monitors and you've got music playing or a movie playing and someone calls you and you want to quickly mute the sound. You don't have to actually spin the wheel all the way down. You just reach out, tap it on your desk, talk to the person, and then tap it to get going again. So it's a really nice feature and one that I enjoy. The final thing to mention is that there's a wheel on top that illuminates in different colors. So it's going to be blue when it's for volume. I think green from memory is for the microphone control and red for balance. I might have the green and red switched around. It's all in the manual, of course. Moving around to the back of the device now. On the back, everything's fairly micro connector style, which means that if you are using RCA connections for external amplifiers, etc., you're going to need to use adapters. That's a slight drawback for me. But it also means that it gives space for everything that's coming out of this. And that's because this will run a full surround sound setup if you want to. You can have it run to your front speakers, or you can just run that to a normal stereo setup. There's also an output for side speakers, rear speakers, and a sub/center channel. So you can run a full 7.1 from this if you want to. I've only tried it with stereo speakers, and I'll talk about that when I get to the walkthrough of some of the features, but it's got the ability to do so much more if you want to. Finally, over here, we've got a line input or optical input. We've got an optical output, and then we've got a USB-C input. So this can feed straight out to a receiver if you want to use the optical output. You can take the signal from this to an external surround sound receiver, but then you can also run a SPDIF input, so that's the line input, optical input, or of course USB-C. I've run it entirely on USB-C for my testing, but there's no reason to expect significant differences in performance between those two. And speaking of performance, I'm going to start by talking about sound because we can get that out of the way pretty quickly. So if you're looking at this from the perspective of how it sounds from an audiophile point of view, I'd say it's okay, but it's not special. The first thing to note is that there is a little bit of background hiss if you're using sensitive IEMs. It's not dreadful, but it's there and it's worth being aware of. But if you're using any sort of full-size headphones or compact portable headphones, anything other than an IEM basically, you're unlikely to hear the hiss. The sound quality itself, I'd say, is solid, but not special for the price. And what I mean by that is it's going to be an upgrade over the headphone output on your desktop or your laptop, but it's not going to be as good as an equivalently priced, dedicated audio device. And I'll give you a direct comparison in a moment to put that into context. The reason that I'm saying it's not the most amazing device from an audiophile point of view is that the soundstage is fairly compact. There's not a great sense of separation or space in the soundstage. Resolution I'd describe as just okay. It's not going to pull out all those fine details that you might expect to hear from a dedicated audiophile device. And ultimately the experience of listening to it is just okay. It's not special, it's not bad at all, but it's not what I would call an audiophile experience. And so to contextualize that, let me tell you what I heard when I compared the X4 here running in direct mode, so there were none of the effects applied, just running in direct mode and comparing it to the equivalently priced EarMen Eagle dongle DAC. Listening to You Don't Treat Me No Good No More by Sonia Dada, what I heard was that the Eagle was clearly more resolving. I was hearing details and textures in the sound that I just wasn't aware of from the X4. Again, not that the X4 is bad, but keep in mind that you're paying the same amount of money, and in one device it's just purely about audio resolution, in the other it's about all kinds of effects and processing power, and we will come to that shortly. I was able to hear textures and sounds, things like percussive sounds, that I couldn't even notice in the X4, but I was hearing from the Eagle. The Eagle produced a larger soundstage, and individual sounds were clearly more separated. And in terms of tonality, I feel like the X4 is just a little bit smoother, a little bit warmer, but it's not horribly thick and rich. It's just that the Eagle was a little bit leaner, probably a bit more neutral overall. It's a very small step, and I wouldn't say that one is better or worse in tonality. It's really things like the soundstage size, image separation, and resolution that separates the X4 from what I would call a true audiophile device. I can't stress enough, the X4 is not a bad device for listening to music. If you're buying it for computer use and its secondary requirement is music, I think it's great. But don't go into buying it if you're not intending to use the other features. Don't go into buying it as an audiophile solution, because I don't think it stacks up financially if that's all you're going to use. However, that's a really nice segue into what else it can do, and that is that it's got a heap of different features. It's got features and functions like the crystallizer that I'll show you shortly. It's got those sorts of features that will help to pull out extra detail, extra clarity in the music. And so some of you might find that with those features switched on and using DSP, it's even more to your liking than something like the Eagle. But I don't think that's a guarantee, and I would personally be choosing the Eagle for pure music listening. To help you decide if that's what you'd prefer though, let's talk now about what the X4 offers in terms of those DSP functions. Trying to work out what gear you should buy next? Have a look at the Passion for Sound Recommends link down in the description below. Clicking on the link will take you through to my Patreon page, and specifically a post where you can click on the Airtable image to go through to my recommended product database. Once you're in the database, you can use the filter button up the top to choose which sorts of product types you want to have a look at, maybe headphones, maybe DACs, maybe amps. Choose the one or ones that you want to see from this list, and then you can also sort the list by price if you want to, or other features as well. You'll then see a consolidated list just of the product types you want to have a look at, including things like what the retail price was when I last checked. You've got links to my reviews of each product, and then also links to where you can go and buy them. Feel free to play around with the filters and sorting options as much as you like to find the gear you're looking for, and I hope that this database points you in just the right direction for you. So happy hunting, happy listening, and now let's get back to the review. One of the key things offered by the X4 is the Super X5 function. This is something that Creative have been building on for a while now, and it's essentially a system where you can use a phone app to scan your head and your ears, and it's then going to work out how to virtualize sound and to create a 3D surround sound experience. I found the app for this a bit clumsy. Unless you've got somebody else to hold your phone and get it to take the shots of your ears and face, it can be really awkward to get it in place. I also found that sometimes it would scan and miss part of the ear, or it would misinterpret where the shape of the ear was, and I don't know how much difference that would make, but it is something to be aware of. You might need to redo the scans a couple of times to get them just right. But then once you do, it does give you a really impressive sort of surround sound virtualization if that's what you're into. I personally felt like as part of that, it pulled the body out of the sound, and I'll show you an example of it shortly. And so for me, the Super X5 function isn't something that I would go for. But for those of you that love a bit of surround sound virtualization, for those of you that want their Super X5 battle mode, where it's going to help you to hear the locations of specific sounds in the mix, it could be really helpful. And so as I said, I'm going to jump in just a second and go through all the features that the X4 has, but I just wanted to flag that the Super X5 app is a bit clunky, it is a little bit fiddly, and then for me, even once it's set up, I'm not sure that I love the results, and that's partly because there's a whole lot of other features in the X4 that actually allow you to do much the same thing in a way that I personally enjoy more. And so let's dive in now and do some on-screen footage and some sample sound of the actual X4 in action. Alright, so let's take a quick walk through the software that comes with the X4 that you download for the X4. What we've got here is, we might start in the top left-hand corner over here. You've got a few extra menus here. So you've got the device settings, of course, we'll come back to that. We can change some things about the playback settings. We can choose the frequency, sampling rates and bit depth for the speakers, and also for the SPDIF out. So you can set those up if you want to, however you want to change those. I tend to just like leaving them pretty much as they are, where it's probably 24-bit, 48 kilohertz is pretty good. But you can play with that as much as you want to. You've then got settings for the headphones. So we can see in here that you can choose if you want virtual surround or just stereo, which is kind of a curious question because you've then also got a virtual surround sound setup. So it's a funny kind of choice that you can actually do both of those. I don't really understand why they're bothering with that when you can actually set it up differently inside the device settings itself, which I'll show you in a second, and it's much easier to access and change through the actual app. So I'm not sure why they're giving you the ability to virtualize that in there. You can also choose the headphone gain, so if you need to have high gain, you can set it in here. So what I'm finding with this is there's a lot of settings, there's a lot of different customizations, but they're all buried in different places, and it's almost a bit like they've had a version of the software and then they've decided to add something on, but instead of building it into the existing setup, they've actually kind of created a whole new menu system for it somewhere else. So there's lots of bits. You go to one place to do one thing, another place to do another thing, and it just feels a bit kind of pieced together to me at times. The performance of some of the things in here is fantastic, as we'll talk about, but the finding what you need and where and knowing all the options available, that's not straightforward. The other final thing is you can actually choose to save the headphone gain settings. Otherwise, I'm guessing it's going to default always to normal. I haven't played around with that one. I'll let you do that if you buy one of these. And you can choose the crossover frequency for your headphones. I don't really know why you would, unless you actually had a true subwoofer in there, but I'm going to leave that all the way down the bottom because I want full range sound going to my headphones. So I don't know if the crossover frequency is working in some way that I don't understand, but I definitely wouldn't want that too high just in case it's trying to pull out sound from the headphones. I'm guessing it's purely going to be only for when you have the virtual surround on, so maybe we'll come back and test that when we're doing some gameplay. Moving on, we've got the speakers line out settings here, so you can calibrate your speakers, so that can be for the levels and the distance from a timing point of view. I haven't played with that. If you've got not a perfect system with like an equilateral triangle for you for say near field setup, you might want to play with that. But if you're not using that, or if you have already set that up, then you can come in here and choose whether you have a stereo setup like I do, or maybe a 2.1, 4.0, 4.1, etc. surround sound system. You can choose to have the same virtualization that you're using for your headphones into the output for your speakers. So for instance, if you're using a 2.1 virtualized system, you can send that to your speakers. And then you can choose what sort of speakers you've got, whether you've got front, left and right. Obviously for stereo, that's the only option available. But if I was to go to say 4.1, if I actually click the right one, and then it should give me, there we go. So I can choose front, left and right and surround speakers. If you have full range speakers in those spots, as opposed to say small satellites that actually rely on the subwoofer. So let's say I had full range speakers at the front, then I might have some satellites for the back that aren't full range, and then I might tell it that my main speakers are say bookshelf speakers. Then you can choose to redirect the bass through to a subwoofer, for instance, and then you can set your subwoofer gain, etc. So it's going to give you lots of those settings. I haven't played around with this one, as I said, because I'm a pure stereo setup person. I don't have surround sound in my office, and I'm also going to set those back to being a desktop speaker, which they are, but they are also full range. So that's how I'm going to have mine set up. And if we now go to recording, in here you can see that you can record, start again. In here you can see the settings you can set up, so what your input is going to be, what the sample rates are it's going to use. So again, I generally leave these things mostly to 24-bit 48. I'm going to actually change that one so they're all aligned. And then finally we get into settings where you can do things like check your firmware version, check your driver versions, etc. So that's all you need to know from this menu. Let's go back now to where kind of the action really happens, with the exception of those couple of things I said feel like they're hidden away when I think they probably should be on this page here. So things like the gain, I think should be here. Things like the virtualization we can actually do through Acoustic Engine. So that's the stuff that I'm not a fan of, but it's not a deal breaker. It's just a bit frustrating at times. So the other thing I should mention is I'm currently using the Rode NTH100M headphones and boom mic. So that's what you're hearing me talk through now. I just wanted to do a comparison test. I've got the NTH100M here. I've also got the new Antline Kimura, which is an IEM based boom mic. So I'm going to switch over to that shortly. But before we do, I just want to have a bit of a play around with a couple of things, and I'll switch over probably when we get into the Smart Comms kit, and you'll understand why when I get there. So before we get there, I just want to talk through Super X4. I'm not going to talk about too much. Theoretically, it's a high-tech system for doing virtual surround sound by understanding your ears and your head, but it relies on using a mobile app to connect up. You then have to scan your head using the mobile app. What it needs you to do is actually take your phone and hold it out to the side so the camera can see your ear, And in the process of doing that, you actually can't see what your phone's pointing at. So unless you've got someone else to do it for you, it's going to be really fiddly. And even then, it just seems like a clumsy system and a clumsy way of doing it. So I'm not a huge fan of that. The Sony WH-XM5s, or I should say WH-1000-XM5 headphones, they have a similar system, and yet they manage to do the ear scan really easily. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with the Super X5 system. But the good news is I didn't find I really needed it. And the reason for that is if we go to Acoustic Engine now, this to me is a fantastic set of options. They are the same for anybody. There's no customization required. You literally can just plug in whatever headphones or earphones you want and turn it on. And the things, as you can probably see here, the things that I really enjoyed is having the surround sound function and the bass function. These are absolutely brilliant when you're in a gaming situation or movie watching and you don't want the sound to sound like it's inside your head. The surround sound virtualization here is fantastic, and this is the one I was referring to before. I don't know why they're letting you, if I come back over to here, I don't know why they're letting you choose virtualization in the headphone setting when you can just come in here and switch it on here. I don't really get why you need to tell it you've got 2.1 or 4.1 or virtualizing that at least within your headphones when you can just switch on surround sound and it's going to produce it for you really beautifully. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It works just fine all the way up to full tilt. It's not one of those things where it starts to get glitchy. So coming out of Acoustic Engine, the next one we've got an equalizer here. So we've got, if I switch it on, I've got a new mouse, so apologies if I miss a few clicks here, that's why. So we've got the SX5 does have its own EQ settings based on the ear scan and the head scan, and otherwise you can do a preset for music, preset for movies, and a preset for footsteps. And I have to say the footsteps one actually does work really well if that's all you want to hear, but it also makes things sound really unnatural. So, for example, I was doing some test footage for Satisfactory. I'll probably jump in there and do some more shortly. But the test footage for Satisfactory, what it showed me when I went into this mode was that I was really struggling to hear things as natural. It did help me hear footsteps, but it made everything else just sound a bit wrong. So do be aware of that. If you want footsteps to hear somebody approaching and that's all you care about, great. But if you want a natural and immersive kind of engaging experience that's not distracting, I don't think it's quite right. And that's where you might choose to tune it yourself. The good news is you can actually, with all of these, get in there and tweak them as you want to. So you could say, hey, I like this, but I want to pull that down a bit and balance other things out, however you want to tweak it. And you'll see then it goes to what's called onboard, and you can always revert it back if you want to. So for me, I've actually just used it off the whole time. I don't really care for EQs, as many of you will know. I'm not against the use of them, I just don't use them myself. For those that didn't notice, sorry, let me turn that back on. You've also got the preamp, bass and treble settings over here. So you can just do a straight flat out tone control if you want to. Nothing wrong with that at all. If you just want to boost bass and treble like so, you can do that. It's entirely up to you. It also means you can take an existing EQ setting, as you've seen here, and boost it in a way that you want. So let's say, for instance, that, if I revert it again, let's say, for instance, that you really liked the footsteps mode, but you just actually wish it had a little bit more bass. You can just go like that, and straight away you've got the footsteps mode with a bit more bass. So that's kind of cool. It's a nice, easy to use EQ if you want to use it. It hasn't got the control and the power of, say, a fully fledged parametric EQ with where you've got the frequency bands and you've got the Q and stuff like that to change the width of the curves, but you can certainly play around in here, and I like the visual sort of click and drag representation. So that's the EQ. Let's now talk Smart Comms kit, and we'll do a microphone switch in here too. So Smart Comms is designed, if you're using this and you're also on voice calls a lot, or you just want to make it easier for people to hear you if you're in a Discord chat, for instance, while you're playing, what you can do in here, if I turn on Advanced, is you get a lot of controls. So first of all, you can set up voice detect. That's going to allow the system to work out when you're talking and when you're not, and automatically mute your microphone. I haven't tested that. I haven't really wanted to mess with it because all my video calls are client calls, so I didn't want to mess with any client calls, but because my work is outside of the audio and passion for sound in general. So that's there if you want it to auto mute you all the time so that you can just start talking, it'll unmute you. If you stop talking, it'll mute you again. That could be really handy. The one that I was really impressed with though is the noise clean out. So I'm going to turn that on now, and you should immediately hear a much cleaner, smoother sound. That's what I heard when I did some test footage with the Camura earlier. What I'm doing this now with, as I said before, is the Rode NTH-100M, but I might take this opportunity to actually unplug the NTH-100M, plug in the Camura, and we'll see how that sounds. Okay, so what you're hearing now is me talking through the Camura. So this is the Antline Kimura. It's a boom mic for your IEMs. And I was just curious to see how the sound quality was, because I wasn't overly impressed with the sound I heard before, but that actually could be the Soundblaster, not the Kimuras, that's causing the problems. So this is now a nice comparison point as well. You get to hear a bit of a preview of the NTH100M up against the Kimuras, and this is also going to give us an idea of how effectively the noise cleanout system is working on both boom mics, but also it's going to give us an idea of which one actually sounds better, and or whether it's the X4 that's bringing in noise. So both of them are noisy when I turn this off, and you would have heard the NTH100M before. Now you're hearing the Kimura with no noise tidy ups. If there's issues still, then we know it's the X4. So moving on from that one, that's what the Smart Comms Kit does. I was really impressed with the noise cleanup there. If we then go over to Crystal Voice, the idea of this one is it can do things like it can fix if you've got any echoes, it can do a smart volume, so it's basically auto gaining for your microphone. I didn't like what the auto gain did, because essentially, I'm going to turn it on for just a second, and I apologise that it's going to basically massively compress everything, and I don't like it. So for me, I'd be leaving that one off. Then you've got some fun here. You can do some voice morphing. So let's go through these. This is essentially if you want to disguise your voice, you want to have some fun with it, etc. I'm not recommending people disguise their voices for any reason other than to have fun with friends. So you've got neutral, that's not going to do anything at all. But then you can go to things like there's what they call a male voice, which will deepen it slightly. We can then go to a female voice, which to my ears doesn't sound entirely like a female. It just sounds like a high-pitched male, but I'll let you decide on that one.
You make yourself sound like a child, which I actually think is not doing too bad of a job. It's one of those things that it's going to depend on what your expectations are, I guess.
The elderly one I was incredibly impressed with. When I heard this back, it's done an amazing job of somehow modulating the voice to give it that sort of slightly quavery, wavery sound.
The deep voice, that's basically like you're completely disguising the voice like you would have heard on a TV current affairs show where they're interviewing someone that wants to remain anonymous.
This one's dreadful. This is modulating the voice, I'm assuming, to sound like you're a Canadian, because it's giving that lilting up and down kind of tonality, but it's never at the right times in the phrases, or really, by luck, it might be at the right times in the phrases, so I just found it a bit silly. I'll let you decide if that's silly or not.
Unstable? I don't know what that's intended to be. I guess that's just like a quavery kind of voice. I don't think it means they're unstable psychologically. I hope it doesn't.
Emo, the only thing I can think here is that it is somehow reducing the range of tonality in the voice, is all I could tell. So if I talk with a lot of extra emphasis and a lot of extra range in the pitch of my voice, that should have actually evened that out so you wouldn't have heard it. Let's wait and see. I can't hear what I'm saying at the moment through the system, so I have no idea if you're actually hearing what I think you're hearing from Emo. I just know what I heard before. It was unclear what it did, and the only thing I can think of is that in my test footage, I might have had more intonation than it sounded like I had coming back. Now we've got some sort of role-playing type specific things. So we've got Dwarf here. Apparently this is what dwarves sound like.
And apparently this is what an elf sounds like, so now I should sound like an elf to you if you're familiar with elves.
The demon one has quite a good sound to it, but I found it really hard to understand, so that's a bit of a problem for me if the intelligibility goes bad.
I have no idea what infiltrate is meant to mean. It's got a very distinct sound. So if there's a particular kind of character type or class type somewhere that you know from a game, let me know in the comments what the infiltrate is all about. Next up, sorry, missed click again.
Now we've got the brute, so this is obviously just making you sound a bit like a thug. Then we move to orc, which is not dissimilar to brute, but it's got a little bit of a different sound to it.
Marine, I actually thought this one was quite good. It was one of those where I thought, what's the sound of a marine? I didn't know that marines had a sound, but I did kind of like what it did to the sound of the voice, so if you wanted to have a bit of fun and give yourself this sort of a sound, marine is there. Then the
obvious one of chipmunk, that's, we've all heard this one before. And then finally,
There's a robot one which I wasn't overly impressed with. I think they could have gone a bit further with this one to make it more fun, but hey, it's in there if you want to play with it. So that's what the voice morph does for you. That's how you can sort of have some fun with that if you want to. And then the final thing, which is actually quite cool, is you can use a microphone equalizer. So with this one, this gives you the ability to run through a whole lot of different presets, and I'll turn it on now. And what you're hearing straight away is the improved clarity preset, which I think actually is quite good. Then though, you can also look at other things like improve vocal and clarity, whatever that means, so we'll hear the difference there. You could also do things like, if you want to, let's say, reduce harshness and improve vocal and clarity. So that should be exactly what you had before, but just also reducing harshness. And then if you want, you can do things like remove bass and harshness and improve clarity. So you can play around with those, find the one that's right for you, your voice and your microphone. I think it's quite a cool feature. I was particularly impressed, as I said before, when I heard just the simple improved clarity. I thought it worked really well. So you can use that one if you want to. Jumping out of here, this is a really cool one. So direct mode here allows you to basically switch off any of the settings you've got going on. So this is going to turn off the acoustic engine. I think it's going to turn off Super X4 as well. It just gives you lots of different choices in terms of, lots of flexibility, I should say, in terms of quickly and easily switching things off. And so you can either click it in the app, or you can click and hold the mode button on the actual device, which is what I've just done, and you'll see that in the app it's recognized it and turned on the direct mode. Now what direct mode is going to do is it's going to turn off some things, and I don't know if it's... Yeah, so direct mode's going to turn off your crystal voice. It's also going to... Okay, so it's not going to affect your smart comms kit. That's good. So you can keep using direct mode and still have the benefit for people to hear you more clearly, but it's going to stop it from doing some of the tweaks to the sound like crystal voice. It's going to stop it from doing the acoustic engine and Super X4. So be aware of that one. So then you can turn it off in the app, or again press and hold the button to turn it off on the device. From there, we've got two other really basic things. I say basic in the sense that they're not high complex, many options. We've got Dolby Digital, so you can send Dolby Digital out through the SPDIF. That's if you've got say an external receiver that's running through to your surround sound system. So what you can do is send out the stream in Dolby Digital Live. And then finally we've got a mixer here where you can choose your different levels, both for the volume, and then also you can choose with the device what you're going to send out through your optical output. So lots of controls, lots of power. I think that's really cool. I love the fact you've got some shortcut buttons on the device to scoop through your EQ and to switch on direct mode and stuff like that. I think that's fantastic. But as I said before, I just feel like there's too much overlap and too much breaking apart of things. Having the virtualizer and the gain settings under playback is a bit annoying, not having it here in other words, and then having things like the scout mode that kind of doubles up on the EQ options, stuff like that just gets a bit clumsy to me. And even the acoustic engine doubling up with the Super X4, I would have liked to see that not have the double up effect. I'll do a bit of gameplay next and show you and talk you through what I'm hearing as I use some of those tools and features in a quick gameplay of Satisfactory. Alright, so I'm going to walk over here and find somewhere that we can get some ambient sounds, maybe fire off a few rounds and kill some beasties, and give you a sense of what the different options are. We're in direct mode at the moment, which means you're getting the sound straight out of the game, so it's not messing with it at all. It's just trying to give you the best possible reproduction of that sound. And now what we might do is I might just stop here for a second, and we're going to change over and use a different sound mode for you. Alright, so we're now essentially also in direct mode because I've turned off all the different features, but I'll just give you a second to hear how that sounds. So there's an artifact nearby. I have no idea where it is. There it is up there. Do I dare?
I strongly advise you to harvest this specimen.
So I'll just give you a chance to hear some of the sounds as I pick things up. And then if I change over now, I just want to show you, we've got the Super X4 function. So if I switch this on, this is the basic Super X4. And you can immediately hear how it changes the sound. So it's creating a 2-channel kind of virtualized surround sound. It might help you to focus on certain other sounds, but I do find it a bit unnatural overall. I'll let you decide if you like it or not. It's one of those things, some people will like it, some people won't. And now if I can get down here without dying, looks like I'm going to be okay. So that's what it sounded like with the Super X4. Let's now go and find a new area to play around, and I'm going to show you the Super X4 battle. Oh, hello. Perfect timing. I was hoping to meet him from a distance where I could actually give you a chance to hear me change to Super X4 battle. There's another one over there. Alright, so you've just heard one battle. Let's now go over to Super X4 battle mode. Now what this should be doing is bringing forward some of the frequencies of things like gunfire You can hear straight away things like the crackling of leaves is louder. Notice the gunshot has a different sound to it. I know it's not actually a gun, but you know what I mean, I'm sure. So that's just Super X5 with a bit more focus on letting you hear things like gunshots, gun handling sounds, footsteps should be easier to hear, stuff like that. Again, I don't know if it's a feature that I particularly love. It does make things a bit unnatural, but if you just focus on hearing all the details there out of here, then it's probably not a bad thing. Let me just deal with this guy and then we'll carry on. So let's go to the next sound effect. Okay, so Super X5 is off now. The other things I want to talk about is the equalizer. So within the equalizer, I can switch that on and we've got options of things like music, movies and footsteps, and I'll give you a chance to hear the footsteps mode. Because what you might notice is it gives you a little bit of an effect of what you were getting from Super X5. So it's just bringing forward some of those sort of ambient sounds. Should change the sound of the weapon I'm using here. So again, a little bit similar to Battle, a little bit similar to the Super X5. Just changes the overall flavour of the sound that theoretically should help you hear the footsteps better. Alright, so I'm going to use this as a point source for sound and walk around it. So technically this is still stereo sound. What I'm going to do now though is let's leave equalizer mode. And I'm going to show you the acoustic engine because this is the stuff that I find the most helpful.
Breaking news from Earth. Widespread chaos and mayhem. World President urges all citizens to do their part and harvest alien artifacts.
So now, hopefully what you're hearing is a much more surround sound type effect.
Your contract legally compels you to harvest this artifact.
Now it's not a perfect surround sound, so for instance things like the sound of this artifact here are a bit lower than they were before. Whoops, sorry about that folks. So you can't hear that as clearly as when the surround sound was off and other sounds are unaffected.
Harvest it.
But I do like the fact that it takes the sound out of your head a little bit more. And so if I now go and turn that surround sound off again, hopefully you're hearing the difference there, and hopefully you've even got headphones on to try this out. If not, grab some headphones, jump back and try that bit again. Now, as I mentioned before, we've got other features in here, like for instance, we can go to the bass edition. I do like that for adding a bit of extra oomph to the sound. And then we've got things like Smart Volume and Crystallizer. Let me show you what Smart Volume does. If I switch that on, you should have heard that all the ambient sounds have kind of come up in volume. And what you'll notice is that the gunshot sounds are actually not as loud as they were in relation to the ambient sounds now. So obviously you can do things like put smart volume with surround sound, and it helps to balance off where the different sounds are placed in terms of the mix, not physically so much as the volume level, I mean. You've also got night mode, which will help to quieten things down even further. Or you've got loud mode, which just kind of maxes out everything. It compresses the hell out of it. I don't tend to use smart volume, I leave that mostly off. And the other two I want to show you is Crystallizer and Dialogue Plus, and I might go to a different game to show you those now. Before I do though, I want to show you one more thing, which is Scout Mode. So the idea of Scout Mode is this is going to give you, according to Creative, this should be giving you lots of access to things like gun handling sounds, footsteps, etc. So it's a little bit like Super X5 Battle, it's also a little bit like the footstep EQ, but apparently it's doing it differently. And that's where things get really confusing for me, is that there's a lot of duplication in terms of different functions that do much the same thing. So you've got your footsteps EQ, you've got scout mode, and you've got Super X5 Battle that are all intended to give you more access to these kinds of gun handling and footstep sounds. And it becomes a bit confusing to me as to why there's so many different ones, which one you should use when. I just find it a little bit clumsy the way they've set it up. So that's something worth taking into account, is that it is a little bit clumsy the way things seem to be duplicated too much. The other thing to keep in mind is that Scout mode will actually forcibly switch off the acoustic engine, Super X5, etc. So you can kind of only run one or the other, which makes sense. Where Scout mode could be handy though is the fact that one switch turns it on, so you can just use it when you need it and then switch it off, and it will return to your normal settings. So that's something that might be helpful for some people. All right, so let's leave Satisfactory now, and we're going to go and check out a different game for the dialogue and crystallizer. So I'm now over in the music platform that I use for all of my Passion for Sound videos, and what I want to do is quickly play a couple of tracks and just show you some of the functions that are more music and movie related. So if we go in now, and we might start with just a quick sample of some music that is without any additions whatsoever, no tweaks, no alterations. Let's find a track here. We'll go with this one I was playing before. Start from the beginning. So no alterations here. And the first thing I want to show you is if we go to Acoustic Engine, and I'm going to turn on the crystallizer now. So you can hear that's enhanced the upper frequencies, upper mid-range and the treble. Obviously that's not 100%. If I pull it down, 60%. And that's with it off versus on. And it does vary depending on the track you're listening to. So I'll go across to this other one. Crystallizer off. Crystallizer on. So I find on some genres it sounds quite good. On other genres like this one, I'd personally prefer to have it off because the samples get just a bit too crispy for me when it's on. So that's what the crystallizer does. You get a fairly good sense there. I'm going to scroll it up and down one more time so you can get a sense of it. So you can have it on just a little bit if you want to, of course. And then if we just go back and look at the dialogue now, I'm going to go back to the original track up here that I was using so I can show you what Dialogue Plus does. We'll just wait for the vocals to kick in. So that's Dialogue Plus on at 49. And I'm going to ramp it all the way up to 100 and you'll hear just how much it isolates the vocal. So you can imagine how good that could be for watching movies. If you really want to be able to hear the dialogue better, it can be really effective. And again, you can scale it as much as you need to. You know, you could pair that up with something like Smart Volume and really help to kind of reduce your peaks and troughs in the sound from a dynamics point of view and also hone in on the dialogue. It does make things sound a bit unnatural though. I'll just pause for a second so you can hear that. Smart Volume off now. That helps take away some of the compression. And then back to normal. You can hear such a dramatic difference when I switch it off there. Now once again though, it's also worth remembering, as I talked about before, if we go into the EQ, there's also movie mode. If I click on movie mode, it's going to focus in again on the mid-range and the vocals. So there's all this double up once again. Or I can go to music mode. Or of course just go back to having it off altogether. And then the final thing I want to show you is if I go to Super X5, for those that do like a virtualized surround sound, you want it to really throw the music outside your head, then you can go over here. And you'll hear it immediately does take it out of your head, particularly if you're wearing headphones, you'll notice that. Whether or not it's good though, it's another question. I feel like it needs a bit of EQ tweaking. If I come back into EQ. So I had a bit of a play with this earlier just to try to beef it up a bit, because I feel like there's something wrong with the treble gets a bit tinny. It probably needs a bit less treble up here. It's still not quite right, but I think you could play with it and get it closer to it while still giving that outside the head effect, but it does just get a bit funky for me. I'm gonna switch it off again. And you'll hear how the music fills out again, and you can hear all the frequencies better, rather than that disembodied sound that's also thrown out away from you a bit. And so that's all the features of the Soundblaster X4. Let's go back now and wrap up the review. So now that you've seen all that footage, let me wrap everything up here by saying that I really like what the X4 offers. I think it's got some fantastic features and options if you're looking for an all-around computer audio device. The fact that it combines communications tools with gaming tools and of course can play back music, it's a really nice do-it-all device, and it's actually been sitting on my desk as my kind of go-to tool for a lot of my gaming and video watching. And that's because I love the surround sound virtualization that's offered in the audio engine. I don't use the Super X-Fi, I don't particularly like it, but being able to just flick a switch and turn up that virtual surround sound, I thoroughly enjoy. And so I think if you're looking for the features and the functions, it's a great buy for the money. I think if you're looking for a pure audiophile tool, there's much better choices like, say, the EarMen Eagle. And I also want to reiterate that I hope in future versions of the app that somehow Creative can find ways to consolidate things better. It would be really nice if there was a more kind of logical flow of how the pieces were laid out so that you could access your surround sound in maybe one place, access your audio tweaks in another place, and what I mean by that is like the crystallizer, the dialogue enhancer, and then maybe access your bass boost, your EQ, those sorts of tonality changes in another. As it is now, you can do a bit of bass boosting in the EQ, a bit of bass boosting in the audio engine, you can do surround sound through Super X-Fi or through the audio engine. And then there's Scout mode, which kind of overlaps a little bit with the footsteps EQ, and it kind of overlaps a little bit with the dialogue enhancer and the crystallizer in the audio engine. There's just lots of little things that seem to double up a bit too much for me. So hopefully Creative can work that out. The features and functions on their own I think are fantastic. I think they're useful and they're helpful, particularly in a gaming environment. But I'd just like to see it a bit easier to get to all of them. And so hopefully I've been able to clarify for you what the X4 is capable of, what it can do, what it does well, what it doesn't do so well. As always, if I have been able to help, if you found the video useful, interesting, helpful, I'd love it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave it to the music or the gaming. So happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.